Karen, we're spending $250,000 on Chloe's Ivy League tuition. She has the looks and the refinement to land a politician. That's a profitable investment. My father, Richard Cox, steepled his fingers like a judge. He stared at me with the coldness reserved for a crashing stock. And you? You're unremarkable. Investing in you is throwing money out the window. You get absolutely nothing. I crushed my state college letter. I'll enlist. I can use the military scholarship. He sneered, the sound scraping against my bones. The military. That's a dumping ground for losers selling their lives for cheap. Go be scum. But don't expect me to watch you scrub toilets. My mother looked away. Chloe casually filed her nails. At 18, my own bloodline executed my self-worth. Without a single tear, I quietly called the recruiter. The Cox family was certain I'd rot in some nameless war zone. They had no idea that 9 years later, sitting at the $50,000 VIP table my father had just bought to show off his arrogant smile, would freeze the second he saw me step out. Before you share your story, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel, but only if this story resonates with you. And please let me know in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is where you are. I stood frozen in that living room for exactly 4 more seconds after my father turned back to his laptop. I counted them the way I would later count rounds in a magazine. 1, 2, 3, 4. Chloe was still stroking that acceptance letter, tilting it under the chandelier so the gold-embossed seal glinted. The air in the room was thick with the smell of expensive Italian leather from the new sofas my father had imported the previous week. $6,000 each, 3 of them arranged around a coffee table that nobody in this family ever used for coffee. The sickening sweetness of my mother's gin clung to the back of my throat. She was on her 3rd glass since dinner, the lime wedge wilting on the rim. My mother, Martha Cox, sat in the wingback chair with her ankles crossed, her manicured fingers wrapped around that sweating glass, her eyes completely subjugated by my father's toxic authority. She did not look at me. She had not looked at me during the entire conversation. Not once. Not when he called me unremarkable. Not when he called me scum. Not when my college letter crumpled in my fist like a dying bird. She looked at the painting above the fireplace, a landscape she had bought at a charity auction 3 years ago, and she chose that painting over her own daughter. I realized right then, standing on the Persian rug that cost more than most people's cars, that in the world of the Cox family, children are not flesh and blood. They are investment portfolios. And I had just been officially delisted. The humiliation tried to claw its way into my veins. It started in my stomach, a sick, hot coiling that pushed upward toward my chest and tried to reach my throat. But it hit a wall. Something older than pain, something primal and cold, clicked into place behind my ribcage like a deadbolt locking. I scanned the 3 of them the way I would later scan hostile rooms. My father had already turned back to his laptop, scrolling through stock tickers on 3 browser tabs, having dismissed me as efficiently as he would close a losing position. He reached for his bourbon, took a sip, and clicked his mouse. I had ceased to exist for him before I even left the room. Chloe giggled into her phone, texting someone about her upcoming campus tour, her thumbs flying over the screen while her acceptance letter sat propped against a crystal vase like a trophy. My mother sipped her gin and stared at the far wall. A woman who had traded her maternal instinct for expensive cocktails, designer shoes, and a life of comfortable submission decades ago. She was 52 years old, and she had not made a single decision in her own marriage since the day she signed the prenuptial agreement. They were no longer my family. They were 3 strangers sharing a genetic code with me, nothing more. A soldier does not stand in a minefield, crying. A soldier finds a way out. I did not go to my sprawling bedroom on the 2nd floor with its walk-in closet and its bay window overlooking the garden. I bypassed it entirely and walked to the hallway closet near the back staircase where we kept the old luggage. I grabbed the cheapest thing in there, a canvas duffel bag with a broken zipper that my father had been meaning to throw away for 2 years, but never bothered, because throwing things away required him to acknowledge they existed. I carried it upstairs and packed in the dark. 3 shirts, 2 pairs of jeans, my state ID, a toothbrush, and the $47 I'd saved from birthday cards my grandmother had sent before she died. The metallic zip of that cheap canvas bag was the loudest sound in the house, louder than the crystal glasses clinking downstairs as my father poured another celebratory bourbon, louder than Chloe's laughter echoing from the living room, louder than the deafening silence of a mother who refused to speak. While the mansion slept off the exhaustion of its own excess, I walked down the back staircase, through the kitchen, and out the service entrance that the housekeepers used. I did not use the front door. The front door was for family. I walked into the biting April wind without looking back. Not at the columns, not at the circular driveway, not at the bedroom window where I had spent 17 years staring at the ceiling, wondering why my father winced every time I walked into a room. I pulled out my cheap flip phone, the one my father refused to upgrade because he said I did not deserve a smartphone, and I dialed the recruiter's direct line. He picked up on the third ring. His voice was rough-tired, the voice of a man used to getting calls from desperate kids at midnight. I told him I wanted infantry. Not administration, not logistics, not some desk job pushing papers at a stateside base. The hardest route possible, the one with the highest dropout rate, the one that broke people who thought they were tough. He paused and asked me if I was sure. I told him I was the surest I'd ever been about anything in my 18 years of life. He asked me why infantry. I told him the truth. If my father wanted to throw me in the mud and call me scum, I was going to turn that mud into a fortified trench and build something his billions could never buy. The recruiter was quiet for a moment. Then he gave me a reporting date and an address. I hung up and stood on the sidewalk for a long time, holding that phone against my thigh. I locked away every expectation of familial love that night. I sealed it in a box inside my chest and buried it under layers of concrete I would spend the next 9 years pouring. From that second forward, the Cox family became civilians. People I swore an oath to protect as part of my duty to this nation, but people I owed absolutely zero emotional debt. The wind cut through my thin jacket. I started walking toward the bus station 6 blocks away. I had $47 in my pocket, a duffel bag with a broken zipper, and a reporting date. That was my entire inheritance from the Cox family empire. 9 years evaporated in a haze of cordite and sweat. While Chloe posted photos of her prestigious sorority galas on social media and bragged about her politician fiancé, Julian Vance, at cocktail parties in Georgetown, I was eating dust in combat zones that did not exist on any public map. The first 2 years nearly killed me. I failed my initial timed ruck march during selection by 43 seconds. 43 seconds. I collapsed face first into red Georgia clay with 80 pounds of gear crushing my spine, my knees buckling my lungs, burning like someone had poured battery acid down my throat. The instructor stood over me, his boots planted 6 inches from my face, and told me to pack my bags. I asked for one more attempt. He laughed a short bark of a laugh that said he had heard that line from 100 washouts before me. I did not move from the clay. I lay there with my cheek pressed into the dirt, staring at the tree line, breathing through my nose until he stopped laughing. He gave me the attempt. I ran the same course the next morning at 4 a.m. on 3 hours of sleep and a stomach full of nothing but water and ibuprofen. I finished with 2 minutes to spare. My boots left bloody prints on the asphalt from burst blisters I had superglued shut the night before. Those prints were still visible on the pavement a week later. I survived the most brutal selection courses the military had to offer, qualifying for programs that had a 92% attrition rate, and I earned the rank of captain in a Joint Special Operations Command intelligence unit. My call sign became Wraith. The instructors chose it. They said I moved through operations like a ghost present, everywhere, visible nowhere. I did not just build muscle and rank. I built a financial fortress. Every time I received hazardous duty pay or deployment bonuses, I did not buy sports cars like the rookies who blew their combat pay on chrome rims, bottle service, and weekend trips to Vegas. I funneled every cent into index funds, government bonds, and aggressive investment portfolios, managed by a retired Marine Corps colonel turned financial advisor I had met during a training exercise at Fort Liberty. He charged me nothing because he said watching a young soldier build generational wealth instead of blowing it on a Camaro was payment enough. My fortune was not measured in stocks, but in hazardous duty pay, silent investment portfolios, and a network of brotherhood forged in gunfire. By the time I was 25, my net worth quietly exceeded my father's liquid assets. The difference was that mine was invisible. No mansion, no Italian sports car, no custom tuxedos, just numbers on a screen that grew steadily while I slept on metal cots and ate vacuum-sealed ration packs in countries whose names I was legally prohibited from speaking aloud. I commanded a covert hostage rescue operation deep in hostile territory during my third deployment. 3 American aid workers were being held by a militia group operating out of a mountain compound at 9,000 feet elevation. I planned the extraction for 11 days, mapping every goat trail, every guard rotation, every blind spot in their perimeter from satellite imagery and drone feeds. I reviewed in a plywood operations center that smelled like diesel and stale MREs. On the 11th night, I briefed the assault team. 12 operators sat on ammo crates and folding chairs while I pointed at a whiteboard covered in hand-drawn diagrams. I told them exactly where every guard would be standing and exactly when the generator would cycle off, leaving the compound dark for 90 seconds. We infiltrated at 2 a.m. under a moonless sky. We came out 47 minutes later with all 3 hostages alive, conscious, and ambulatory. 0 friendly casualties. 0 shots fired that were not accounted for in the after-action report. The youngest hostage, a 23-year-old nurse from Ohio, grabbed my arm as we loaded her onto the helicopter and said 4 words I never forgot. "Thank you for coming." Those words meant more to me than anything my father had ever said. I held top-secret SC clearance, the kind that made senators sign non-disclosure agreements before entering the same briefing room as me. My signature moved millions in military assets across 3 continents. I sat in debriefing rooms with generals who commanded entire armies, and they stopped talking when I spoke. The girl who was deemed a bad investment was now dictating moves on the geopolitical board while her sister was picking out centerpieces for a political fundraiser in a DC hotel ballroom. I sat on a metal cot in the barracks one night after a 16-hour intelligence cycle, stripping my rifle. I ran the oiled cloth over the bolt carrier group with the slow precision of a surgeon cleaning an instrument. I looked at the calluses on my hands. They were thick and yellowed, cracked at the edges, the hands of someone who had hauled sandbags, climbed knotted ropes in the rain, dragged wounded operators through drainage ditches under fire, and typed classified intelligence reports until 3 a.m. on keyboards sticky with instant coffee. I was financially impenetrable and physically lethal. The Cox family thought they had starved me out. They thought cutting me off from their money and their love would turn me into a cautionary tale they could reference at dinner parties when other wealthy parents complained about ungrateful children. They only fed a machine they could never hope to control. I slammed the bolt carrier forward into the upper receiver. The sharp, metallic clack echoed in the empty barracks like a gunshot, and I let it ring. I was 21 years old, hunkered down at a forward operating base in eastern Afghanistan. We had just returned from a brutal night patrol that lasted 9 hours through terrain so rough we lost 2 radios and a pack mule to a collapsed ravine. The patrol had gone hot 3 hours in when we walked into a hasty ambush in a dry riverbed. My boots were caked in mud and dried blood, some of it mine, and some of it belonging to a 19-year-old private I had dragged behind a rock wall by the handle on the back of his body armor. My left shoulder throbbed where a piece of shrapnel had grazed the meat of my deltoid during the ambush. Doc Jenkins had stitched it shut with 12 sutures in the back of a bouncing armored vehicle while I bit down on a leather strap and stared at the ceiling. The anesthetic had run out 2 patients ago. She used iodine and dental floss for the last 3 stitches. I did not scream. I counted the rivets in the ceiling panel above me and let the pain pass through my body like a current. Sitting on sandbags under a freezing rain, I managed to secure 5 minutes on the satellite phone. 5 minutes of connection to the outside world. 5 minutes that had cost me 3 favors and a shift trade with another officer. The line crackled with static. I dialed the mansion's landline. It was Thanksgiving Day. "Hello," my mother answered. The crisp, clean notes of a live jazz quartet and the clinking of crystal glasses instantly flooded my earpiece. Smooth jazz piano. The low murmur of polite conversation. The delicate ring of a silver fork touching porcelain. The sound was so polished, so pristine, it felt like shoving my head through a portal into a different dimension. A world of champagne and linen napkins and warm dining rooms existing simultaneously with the world of mud and blood and freezing rain I was kneeling in. "Mom, it's me," I said. My voice cracked slightly. It was the last shred of weakness left in me, the final pathetic reflex of a child wanting her mother on a holiday. I hated myself for the crack. I swallowed it down like shattered glass. "Happy Thanksgiving." A long, agonizing silence followed. 3 seconds. 5. 7. I could hear the jazz piano tinkling in the background, someone laughing, the pop of a champagne cork silverware scraping against porcelain plates. "Oh, Karen, hello." I swallowed hard. The rain was running down the back of my neck and pooling in the collar of my body armor. The shrapnel wound burned under the fresh sutures every time I breathed. "Is Dad there?" Through the static, I heard my father's furious bark in the background, sharp and immediate, the voice of a man interrupted during an important business transaction. He did not even lower his voice. "Tell her I'm entertaining the senator. Don't ruin dinner with military trash." My mother did not hesitate. There was no pause, no intake of breath, no flicker of conscience, no millisecond of maternal instinct fighting against the chokehold of her cowardice. Her voice smoothed out like polished marble, the practiced ease of a woman who had been lying for her husband for 30 years. "Your father is busy," she said. "Chloe just brought Julian over. It's a lovely evening. Goodbye, Karen." The line went dead. The satellite phone's screen blinked twice, then went dark. I sat on those sandbags with the phone in my lap, the rain hammering my helmet for a long time. Then I opened Facebook on the base's shared tablet, the one with the cracked screen and the sticky keyboard. A fresh photo sat at the top of my feed, posted 11 minutes ago. The four of them raising crystal glasses over a glistening golden turkey in the formal dining room. My mother in her pearl necklace and cream silk blouse. My father in his custom navy blazer with brass buttons. Chloe in a cashmere sweater the color of fresh cream, leaning into Julian Vance, who flashed his practiced politician's smile at the camera like he was already rehearsing for a campaign poster. The table was set with exactly 4 chairs, 4 place settings, 4 linen napkins folded into swans, 4 wine glasses filled with burgundy, 0 space for the daughter taking bullets in the dark on the other side of the world to keep them safe. Not a single empty seat, not even a gesture toward one. I dropped the tablet into the dirt. The screen cracked against a flat rock with a sharp pop. Sergeant Sarah Jenkins, my unit's combat medic, the woman whose hands had been elbow-deep in my shoulder wound 10 minutes prior, knelt beside me on the wet sandbags. Her fatigues were still stained dark with my blood. She did not ask what happened. She did not offer sympathy. She did not deliver a motivational speech about toxic families. She pulled a green military ration bar from her cargo pocket, ripped the wrapper off with her teeth, and shoved it into my hand. "Eat up, Captain. Your family's right here." I took the bar. I peeled back the foil with shaking fingers and bit into it. It tasted like chalk and salt and preservatives, the worst meal I'd ever eaten, and the most important one. I chewed slowly, staring out into the pitch-black Afghan desert where the mountains dissolved into the darkness like the edge of the known world. Around me, the sounds of my unit settling in for the night filled the cold air. Someone was heating water on a portable stove. Someone else was cleaning a weapon. Doc Jenkins sat beside me in silence, her shoulder pressed against mine, her hands folded in her lap, and she stayed there until I finished eating. I buried the Cox family that night. I drove them into the ground like a coffin nail hammered flat. My bloodline no longer shared a last name or a Georgetown address. My bloodline wore camouflage and carried tourniquets and split their last bottle of water with me in the back of a helicopter. My father wanted investment returns. Doc Jenkins gave me her blood literally from a transfusion bag on a medevac flight without being asked and without expecting a single thing in return. Years later, I took a mandatory leave and stepped back into the DC mansion for the first time in over 3 years. I wore plain jeans and a blank black t-shirt, 0 insignias, 0 rank patches, 0 unit crests. Pure operational camouflage, the kind of deliberate invisibility I had perfected in hostile territory. The front door was unlocked as always because billionaires trusted their security systems more than common sense. I walked in and the smell hit me first. The same suffocating blend of my father's expensive cologne and furniture polish and the faint chemical sweetness of the flowers the housekeepers replaced every 3 days. My military instincts kicked in the second I crossed the threshold. I bypassed the plush leather sofas arranged in the center of the living room, the ones designed for lounging, for looking comfortable and approachable. I walked past them and took a rigid wooden chair in the far corner of the room, putting my back flush against the wall and establishing a clear line of sight to every exit, every window, and the main staircase. I folded my hands in my lap and waited. My father swept into the room 12 minutes later. I had timed it. He carried a bourbon already in his hand, amber liquid in a crystal glass, his silk robe open over a monogrammed dress shirt. He looked me up and down with that familiar half-smirk, the same expression he used when reviewing a quarterly earnings report that had disappointed him. Still clinging to that minimum wage job. He mocked walking past me toward the crystal decanter on the mahogany sideboard. He poured himself a second bourbon, the liquid catching the light. Julian is about to run for Senate. You should find a realistic career. Stop dirtying this family's face. He thought he was towering over a failure. He stood there in his Italian loafers, swirling his bourbon, his chest puffed out, radiating the kind of bulletproof confidence that only total ignorance can produce. He had no idea that the bank accounts tied to my social security number dwarfed his liquid assets by a factor of 3. He had no idea I held the security clearance to read his precious senator friend's classified intelligence briefings before that senator even saw them. He had no idea that the woman sitting in the corner chair in a $5 black t-shirt had commanded hostage rescue operations in 4 countries and held the tactical authority to redirect military aircraft with a single encrypted phone call. I took a slow sip of my black coffee. I had brewed it myself in the kitchen, ignoring the $12,000 espresso machine and using the old drip maker that had been shoved into the back of the cabinet behind the imported tea tins. I channeled the exact terrifying stillness I used when sitting across from cartel lieutenants in windowless interrogation rooms on classified military installations. I'm fine with my choices, sir. My voice dropped to a flat deadpan baseline, devoid of emotion, devoid of inflection, the vocal equivalent of a flatline on a heart monitor. My absolute lack of reaction infuriated him. His nostrils flared. The tendons in his neck tightened. He wanted me to scream. He wanted me to beg. He wanted me to defend my life choices so he could tear them apart the way he had been doing since I was 12 years old and came home with a B+ on a math test. I gave him nothing. I sat there and watched them rehearse their high society theater for the next 40 minutes. Chloe waltzed into the living room in designer jeans and a cashmere top, gushing about Julian's campaign strategy, dropping the names of donors, super PAC organizers, and fundraising events like she was reciting a grocery list of important people. My mother appeared briefly in the doorway, offered me a tight smile that did not reach her eyes, and disappeared back into the kitchen to supervise the caterers preparing for a dinner party I'd not been invited to attend. I did not feel an ounce of anger. I only saw the pathetic blindness of people who used money to put a price tag on human souls. A sniper's doctrine dictates you never engage a target that is not worth the bullet. I set my empty coffee mug on the glass side table with deliberate precision, the ceramic landing without a whisper of sound. I stood up smoothly, tugged the hem of my black t-shirt straight, and walked out the front door without another word. Nobody followed me. Nobody called my name. Nobody even looked up. 2 weeks before the night that changed everything, the Freedom Gala took over the most opulent ballroom in Washington, D.C. This was not a charity dinner or a corporate networking event. This was the annual Nexus, where Pentagon brass shook hands with Capitol Hill power brokers, where 4-star generals clinked glasses with defense lobbyists over champagne that cost more per bottle than most enlisted soldiers earned in a week. The guest list was managed by military intelligence. The security was handled by the Secret Service. The invitations were printed on paper stock that required a federal procurement code. My father, Richard Cox, dropped $50,000 to secure VIP table number 1 dead center of the ballroom, directly in front of the main stage front row. He had been planning this move for months, leveraging every lobbyist contact he had cultivated over 3 decades to secure that specific table. He paraded around the pre-reception area in his custom Italian tuxedo, a bourbon in one hand and a business card in the other, shaking hands with every politician and defense contractor within arm's reach. He was on a mission. Julian Vance's Senate campaign needed a launchpad into the military-industrial complex's inner circle, and this gala was the golden ticket. He introduced Julian to a retired admiral. He cornered a defense committee staffer near the bar. He laughed too loudly at a congressman's joke and slapped the man on the shoulder. He was performing, and the performance was flawless. Chloe sparkled for the paparazzi cameras in a diamond-encrusted gown that cost more than most Americans' annual salary. The fabric shimmered under the ballroom lights like liquid silver. She giggled on Julian's arm, posing for every photographer who pointed a lens in her direction, angling her engagement ring so it caught the flash at the perfect moment. My mother sat at table 1 with her champagne flute raised to the room, pearl earrings catching the chandelier light, her posture radiating old money and breathing every inch of her body, communicating that she belonged here and always had. They truly believed the Secret Service agents lining the walls and the rows of decorated officers filling the ballroom were there to serve as a glamorous backdrop for the Cox family's spectacular social ascent. They thought they owned the room because they had bought a table. They thought the generals and the senators and the intelligence chiefs were their audience. They had no idea they were the audience, and the show had not started yet. They did not know that the entire event was a classified operational cover. It was not a political fundraiser. It was not a networking opportunity for defense lobbyists. It was a secure venue designed by the Department of Defense to award the Silver Star, one of the nation's highest combat decorations, to a covert operative whose identity had been classified for 3 years. The generals were not there for the champagne. The Secret Service was not there for the politicians. The 2,000 seats had been filled with the most powerful military and political figures in the country for one reason, and that reason was standing 20 feet from my father's smug face hidden in the pitch-black wings of the backstage area. I wore my crisp army dress blues. Every crease on that uniform was razor-sharp, pressed by a fellow officer who had spent 45 minutes with a steam iron and a ruler because she understood that tonight was not about fabric. It was about armor. The brass buttons gleamed. The blue infantry cord looped over my right shoulder and hung against my chest in a perfect drape. The unit crest of Joint Special Operations Command sat above my heart, the same heart that had been hammering against the walls of my ribcage for the last 20 minutes, while I stood in the darkness and controlled my breathing. The dress shoes were polished to a mirror finish. I could see the reflection of the stage lights in the toe caps. I ran my thumb slowly over the heavy rack of ribbons and medals stacked on my left breast. Each one represented a deployment, a mission. A night's sleep was a luxury I could not afford. The Combat Action Badge, the Meritorious Service Medal, the Bronze Star with a V for Valor. Every single piece of metal on that uniform had been paid for in blood and sweat, in sleepless nights, and in decisions that would haunt a normal person for the rest of their life. The Silver Star itself sat in a velvet case in the general's hands backstage, waiting to be pinned. Through the narrow gap in the velvet curtain, I locked my eyes directly onto my father's face at table number 1. He was leaning over to whisper something to Julian, probably coaching him on which general to flatter first, which handshake to offer, which patriotic talking point to recite. I watched his mouth move. I watched him laugh, throwing his head back, bourbon sloshing in his glass. My heart rate dropped to a steady 60 beats per minute. My breathing leveled into the slow measured rhythm of a marksman aligning a shot. My hands were still. The trembling had stopped. Operation Reality was a go. If you have ever had to sit in silence while toxic people bragged about accomplishments they did not earn, hit that like button right now. Tell me in the comments how long it took you to finally stop playing their game, because the mask is about to slip and the fallout will be absolute. General Arthur Sterling, commander of United States Special Forces, stepped up to the podium. 4 silver stars gleamed on each shoulder of his dress uniform, each one representing decades of combat leadership, classified operations, and buried friends. The man had commanded operations on 6 continents. He had sent young soldiers into darkness and waited for them to come back. Some did not. He carried those names in a leather-bound notebook he kept in his breast pocket, and he read them every morning before breakfast. He was not a politician who had purchased a table. He was a warhorse who had earned every inch of stage he stood on. And tonight, he was furious on my behalf. The second he tapped the microphone with one thick finger, the entire ballroom of 2,000 elites went dead silent. The transformation was instantaneous. Forks stopped mid-air. Champagne flutes froze halfway to lips. Conversations died in mid-sentence. The only sound was the low hum of the air conditioning system 40 feet above the chandeliers. At table number 1, my father leaned forward in his $50,000 chair. He smoothed his silk tie. He sat up straighter, pasting a look of deep patriotic respect on his face, the expression of a concerned citizen who deeply valued the sacrifices of the military. He was desperately trying to catch the general's eye for a photo opportunity. He adjusted his lapel pin, the tiny American flag he had bought at a gift shop on his way to the gala. General Sterling's voice rolled through the ballroom like thunder across an open battlefield. Each word carried the weight of a man who had spent 40 years giving orders that sent people into combat. Tonight we are not here for political compromises. We are here to honor a living legend, an officer who sacrificed her youth in the darkest corners of the world, so that every person in this room could sleep safely in their homes. He paused. The silence in the ballroom was so dense I could hear my own heartbeat through the curtain. His eyes cut across the crowd like a laser beam, sweeping from table to table, before settling unmistakably on the VIP section at the front of the room. This person was rejected by her own biological family. She was called scum with no future. She was told she was a worthless investment, a financial loss not worth the cost of a college education. I pressed my eye to the gap in the curtain and watched something extraordinary happen. My father nodded. He actually nodded along in solemn agreement. He pursed his lips and adopted the expression of a concerned, empathetic billionaire listening to a tragic story about someone else's family failure. He shook his head slightly, performing disapproval as if the anonymous family being described was beneath him. He raised his champagne glass slightly toward the podium in a gesture of patriotic solidarity, completely clueless that the general was narrating his own living room. My mother dabbed at the corner of her eye with a cocktail napkin, moved by the story. Chloe squeezed Julian's hand. The sheer audacity of their blindness was staggering. They were nodding along to the story of their own cruelty, too arrogant and too insulated by their own wealth to recognize themselves as the villains in the narrative. General Sterling leaned into the microphone. His voice turned from rolling thunder to forged steel, every word sharpened and deliberate. But the United States Army found in her an indestructible diamond. She became one of the most decorated intelligence officers in the history of Joint Special Operations Command. She has led operations that saved American lives in theaters of war that this audience will never know existed. He gripped both sides of the podium. His knuckles whitened. Ladies and gentlemen, please rise to your feet and welcome Captain Karen Cox. Call sign Wraith. The spotlight slammed onto the edge of the curtain like a fist of white light. 2,000 chairs scraped against the marble floor as the audience rose. The velvet curtain parted. I stepped out into the blinding light. I marched toward the podium. The sharp, heavy click of my leather dress heels striking the hardwood stage cut through the silence like rifle shots. Click, click, click. Each step was measured, deliberate, spaced, at the exact cadence of a military march, the rhythm of someone who had walked through ambushes and firefights and interrogation rooms and come out the other side carrying the deed to every single one of them. The metals on my chest clinked against each other with cold, metallic precision. The silver star ribbon, not yet pinned, waited in the general's hands. I did not look at the crowd. I did not scan the faces. I kept my eyes locked in a 1,000-yard stare fixed on the podium, walking with the posture of a commander who had earned the right to occupy every square inch of space she crossed. The blue infantry cord swayed gently against my chest with each step. The brass buttons caught the spotlight and threw it back into the room. At table number 1, the world ended. The champagne flute slipped from my father's trembling fingers and shattered against the marble floor. The sound cracked through the silent ballroom like a pistol shot. Champagne sprayed across the white tablecloth in a violent arc, soaking the linen napkins, folded into swans. His face drained of all color in under 2 seconds, the the ruddy bourbon flush turning to the gray pallor of a man watching his entire reality collapse in front of 2,000 witnesses. His jaw went slack. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His hands gripped the edge of the table so hard the tendons stood out against his skin like cables. My mother clamped both hands over her mouth so hard her manicured fingernails dug into her own cheeks. She stumbled backward out of her chair, her hip catching the edge of the table, rattling the silverware, nearly tipping backward. A strangled whimper escaped between her fingers. Chloe and Julian sat frozen in their seats, their mouths hanging open, their bodies locked in the total paralysis of people whose brains could not process what their eyes were seeing. Chloe's hand was still wrapped around her champagne glass, but the glass was tilting, spilling down the front of her diamond-encrusted gown, and she did not notice. Around them, 2,000 generals, senators, cabinet members, defense secretaries, intelligence chiefs, and military elites leaped to their feet in a deafening standing ovation for the bad investment. The roar of applause rolled through the ballroom like a wave crashing against the Cox family table. I reached the podium. I stopped in front of the microphone stand. I snapped a razor-sharp salute to General Sterling, holding it for 3 full seconds, my fingers locked at the exact angle prescribed by Army regulation, my elbow level with my shoulder. He returned it with a slow, deliberate nod that carried the weight of every classified mission we had survived together, every intelligence briefing we had shared, every time he had read my field reports and penciled exemplary in the margins. Then I lowered my hand and slowly turned my gaze downward, away from the general, away from the crowd, and locked eyes with my father at table number 1. I did not show anger. I did not show pain. I did not show the bleeding, scarred 18-year-old girl who had walked out of his mansion with a duffel bag and $47. I showed him absolute, terrifying authority. The authority of a woman who had stared down warlords in underground bunkers and walked away with their operational secrets and their surrender. "Thank you, General," I said into the microphone. My voice projected through the speakers with the calm, lethal cadence of a commander delivering a battlefield briefing to a room full of operators. 9 years ago, someone told me the military was a dumping ground for losers and unprofitable investment. The ballroom was silent. 2,000 people held their breath. My mother let out a muffled whimper that echoed off the marble walls. My father shrank into his $50,000 chair. His shoulders curled inward. His hands gripped the armrest so tightly his knuckles turned white. He looked like a man strapped into an electric chair, waiting for the switch. "They were right," I said. I smirked slightly, just the left corner of my mouth lifting a fraction of an inch, and touched the silver star on my chest with 2 fingers. I failed. I failed to live a fake life, measuring my worth in soulless numbers. I failed to become a trophy on someone's mantle, a line item in someone's financial portfolio. I leaned closer to the microphone. My breath was steady. My hands were still. The entire room existed inside this moment. But I learned something that no amount of money can buy. A person's value is not measured by the money they bring into a living room. It is measured by their courage facing a gun barrel in the dark. Honor, respect, and brotherhood are things you earn yourself, not something you beg for on your knees from the blind. I stepped back from the podium. General Sterling moved forward and pinned the silver star to my chest. The metal was cold against my uniform. I held the salute while the room erupted. The applause came like a shockwave, a physical wall of sound that hit the chandeliers and bounced off the marble walls and floors and filled every square inch of that ballroom with the roar of 2,000 people who understood exactly what I had said and exactly who I had said it to. Officers stamped their feet. Senators stood with their hands clasped. The standing ovation lasted 4 full minutes. At table number 1, the Cox family sat crushed beneath the weight of their own irrelevance, drowning in the applause for the daughter they had thrown away like a losing stock. As the gala wound down and the crowd began to thin, I stood near the main exits in conversation with the Secretary of Defense about a classified intelligence briefing scheduled for the following week. I saw them approaching out of my peripheral vision before I heard them. My father's stride was unmistakable, the aggressive power walk of a CEO who refused to accept a losing quarter. His shoulders squared, his jaw set, his eyes locked on me with the desperate intensity of a man trying to salvage a deal that had just blown up in his face. His predatory business instincts had kicked in. He could not accept defeat. He could not accept that his discarded daughter had just been publicly honored by the most powerful military figures in the country, while he sat at his expensive table and watched his champagne glass shatter on the floor. He wanted to claim my glory as his own. He wanted to spin the narrative. He wanted to walk up to me in front of the remaining press photographers and put his arm around me and tell the room that he had always believed in me, that this was the Cox family's proudest moment. "Karen," he boomed, plastering on a wide camera-ready smile, his arms opening to grab my shoulders. "My beloved daughter, I always knew you had it in you." My combat reflexes engaged before my conscious mind caught up. I took a sharp half-step backward, a flawless tactical retreat that established a defensive boundary between his outstretched hands and my body. My spine straightened, my chin lifted, my eyes turned into daggers and pinned him to the marble floor where he stood. "Mr. Cox." I addressed him by his last name, not dad, not father. His surname delivered with the same tone I would use to address a foreign national at a security checkpoint. My voice froze the air around us. The Secretary of Defense quietly stepped aside. "The safe distance is 1 meter." His fake smile cracked down the center. The warmth drained from his face and was replaced by the familiar fury, the red flush crawling up his neck like a rash, the same red that had colored his face every time I had failed to meet his expectations as a child. "What the hell are you doing?" he hissed through his teeth, leaning forward, trying to close the distance I had created. His voice was low and venomous. "Don't humiliate me. We are family." I looked him up and down the way I would assess a deserter brought before a military tribunal. Slowly. Clinically. Starting at his Italian leather shoes, scuffed now from pacing the ballroom floor in panic, moving up past the wrinkled crease in his tuxedo pants where he had gripped his own thighs in shock, past the champagne stain spreading across his white shirt, from the shattered glass up to his silk pocket square that had been knocked askew when he lurched out of his chair. Without mercy. Without warmth. Without a single flicker of the daughterly affection he had spent 18 years refusing to earn. My family are the ones who split blood bags on a medevac chopper. My family is Doc Jenkins over there. I tilted my head slightly towards Sarah, who stood 15 feet behind me. Her arms crossed over her dress uniform, her jaw set like a granite slab, watching the exchange with the quiet readiness of a combat medic who had seen worse confrontations in far worse places. "You are just an investor who realized he threw away the most valuable stock on the market. You don't have the right to touch this uniform." My mother shoved past him, her heels clicking frantically on the marble. Tears were streaming down her face, cutting black mascara tracks through her foundation, ruining the 2 hours of expensive makeup application that had been meant to project elegance and control. Her pearl necklace swung wildly against her collarbone. She reached for my hands, her fingers trembling. "Karen," she gasped. "I'm sorry. I was too much of a coward. I watched him treat you like that for years, and I said nothing. I chose comfort over my own child. Please give me a chance to make amends." I looked at her face. I studied the mascara tracks, the trembling lips, the bloodshot eyes. I searched for something real, something worth salvaging, some flicker of the mother I'd wanted her to be for 18 years. I found nothing but the desperation of a woman who had just realized that 2,000 of the most powerful people in the country had witnessed her fail as a parent. I felt zero empathy. Only clinical pity, the detached assessment a surgeon makes when examining a patient who refused treatment until the disease became terminal. "Your regret cannot change the past, ma'am. I forgive you not to give you peace, but to officially free myself from this burden called a bloodline." Chloe stood trembling behind both of them, her diamond-encrusted gown stained dark with the champagne she had spilled on herself. Her eye makeup smeared her carefully constructed facade of beauty and privilege, crumbling in real time. Julian had vanished, probably already on his phone in the men's room, with his campaign manager calculating the political fallout, drafting a statement to distance himself from the Cox family name. "You're so amazing," Chloe stammered, her voice cracking. Her lower lip trembled. I never knew any of this about you." I gave her a crisp diplomatic nod. The kind of nod you give a foreign dignitary you will never meet again, polite, precise, and final. "Because you never wanted to know Chloe. Take care of them. After all, you're still their best investment. I turned on my heel. The leather sole of my dress shoe squeaked against the marble in a sharp, clean pivot, a perfect about-face executed with the muscle memory of 1,000 parade drills. I marched through the double doors and out into the lobby without breaking stride. I did not look back. Not at the tears. Not at the shattered glass still glittering on the floor of table number 1. Not at the 3 people standing in the ballroom who shared my blood but would never again share my life. Doc Jenkins fell into step beside me, matching my pace stride for stride, without a word. The night air hit my face when the front doors opened. I took one deep breath and held it for 4 seconds. Then I let it go, and I kept walking. 1 month passed. The battlefield was entirely under my control. Julian Vance's political campaign imploded within 72 hours of the gala. The military elite quietly and systematically blacklisted the Cox family from every defense-related event, fundraiser, and social gathering in Washington. The story of the billionaire CEO, who had called the military a dumping ground for losers while his own daughter earned a Silver Star for heroism, spread through D.C. Social circles like gasoline poured on an open flame. Donors pulled their funding from Julian's campaign. Endorsements evaporated overnight. 3 sitting senators who had been photographed shaking my father's hand at previous events released public statements distancing themselves from the Cox family. My father's lobbying firm lost 2 of its largest defense contracts within a week. He called my secure line 12 times in the first 10 days, leaving frantic, choking voicemails that swung wildly between rage and desperation. In one message, he threatened to sue me for defamation. In the next, he begged for a private meeting. In the third, he cried, his voice breaking apart on the recording like a man who had finally encountered a problem his money could not solve. My mother flooded the base mail room with tear-stained letters written on her personal monogrammed stationery, each one longer and more desperate than the last, each one begging for forgiveness, for a chance for a conversation. I did not block their numbers. A commander does not hide from enemy fire. A commander simply stands out of range and lets the rounds fall harmlessly into the dirt. I listened to the voicemails while cleaning my sidearm at my desk in my quarters, the red blinking light of the voicemail indicator pulsing on and off like a heartbeat, while I ran a bore brush through the barrel and wiped down the slide with a cloth that smelled like solvent. His voice on the recordings shifted from rage to pleading to silence over the course of the week. In voicemail number 9, he called me by a nickname he had not used since I was 6 years old. I noted it the way I would note an enemy combatant changing tactics under pressure. Desperation, not affection. In voicemail number 12, the last one, there was nothing but 30 seconds of breathing and the muffled sound of a glass being set down on wood. Then, the line cut. I felt absolutely nothing. Not satisfaction, not anger, not grief. The control of the narrative was permanently mine. I had not taken it by screaming or by arguing or by begging for a seat at their Thanksgiving table. I had taken it by building something undeniable brick by brick in silence and letting the truth do the demolition work when the time was right. I collected my mother's letters from the mailroom in a plain cardboard box, carried them across the base to the incinerator behind the motor pool, and fed them into the flames one by one without opening a single envelope. I did not need to read them. The time for her words had been 18 years ago in a living room that smelled like gin when a girl needed her mother to say one word and her mother chose silence. The paper curled and blackened in the fire. The smoke rose into the gray morning sky. I watched it disappear, turned around, and walked back toward my quarters. I stepped out of my building and onto the tarmac the next morning. The sunlight hit the concrete in long, clean strips. The air smelled like jet fuel and the fresh coffee brewing in the command tent 50 yards away. A pair of Black Hawks sat on the flight line, their rotors still, their hulls gleaming in the early light. Doc Jenkins appeared from behind a parked Humvee and tossed me a thermos of black coffee, a perfect spiral throw that I caught one-handed without breaking stride. Her shoulder bumped mine as she fell into step beside me, and we walked toward the briefing tent in comfortable silence. Her boots and my boots hit the tarmac in unison without either of us trying. We did not need words. We did not need to explain ourselves to each other or to anyone else. This was my family. People who did not care about my bank account, or my last name, or my social standing, or the school I had attended, or the car I drove. People who cared only that I had their back when the sirens wailed, that I would split my last canteen of water with them in the dirt, and that I would carry them off a battlefield on my back if it came to that. The deepest wounds do not come from enemy shrapnel. They come from the knives held by the people who share your blood, the ones who smile at Thanksgiving dinner, and then close the door while you bleed on the other side of the world. But justice does not come from begging abusers to change. It does not come from screaming. It does not come from tears or from letters or from desperate phone calls in the middle of the night. Justice comes from the discipline to build an undeniable fortress of strength, brick by brick in silence, while they sit in their expensive chairs and laugh and pour another bourbon and congratulate themselves on their profitable investments. You have the right to set the tactical perimeter of your own life. You have the right to decide who gets inside and who stays at a distance of exactly 1 meter. When you have survived the fire, the insults of toxic people sound like wind blowing past a rifle barrel. Loud, piercing, but utterly harmless. I holstered my sidearm, tightened the strap on my thermos, and walked toward the sunrise with Doc Jenkins at my side. If you have successfully built your own fortress and cut the toxic leeches out of your life, hit the like button and subscribe to stand with me. Drop a comment below and tell me who makes up your true chosen family today, because blood means nothing without loyalty.